There comes a quiet moment in every life, often unnoticed, often disguised as exhaustion or longing, when the soul whispers a truth the mind has been avoiding. You were never meant to carry this burden alone. In that moment, when the noise of striving grows tired of its own echo, something deeper begins to stir. It is not loud, it does not demand. It simply reminds you of what you have always known before fear learned how to speak louder than faith. It says, gently but unmistakably, believe God for the impossible. Not as a strategy, not as a last resort, but as a return to your natural state of trust. Faith is not something you manufacture when life falls apart. Faith is what remains when you stop trying to control the outcome. Most people misunderstand faith as hoping very hard for a particular result, as if God were a cosmic negotiator responding to intensity. But faith is not about convincing the universe to obey your wishes. Faith is about releasing the false idea that you were ever meant to run the universe in the first place. It is the deep inner knowing that there is an intelligence moving through all things, and that same intelligence is moving through you, not against you, not absent from you, but as you. When circumstances look impossible, the ego panics. It scans the evidence, measures the odds, revisits the past, projects the future, and concludes that there is no way forward. The ego survives by proof. It needs guarantees, timelines, and visible assurances. Yet every miracle that has ever unfolded in human history appeared first as an impossibility to the rational mind. If the path were obvious, it would not require faith. If the door were already open, you would not need courage to walk toward it. To believe God for the impossible is not to deny reality, it is to recognize that reality is far more expansive than the narrow lens through which fear interprets it. What you call impossible is often just the limit of your current perception. The infinite does not consult your resume, your past mistakes, your bank account, or your diagnosis before it moves. It moves according to laws that are invisible to fear but perfectly clear to trust. Trust in God shifts reality, not because God suddenly intervenes from afar, but because your alignment changes the way life flows through you. When you trust, you stop resisting. When you stop resisting, energy moves freely. And when energy moves freely, circumstances rearrange themselves in ways the logical mind could never predict. Trust is not passive. It is the most powerful form of participation there is, because it places you in harmony with the creative force rather than in opposition to it. Think for a moment about how much of your life has been shaped not by what actually happened, but by what you feared might happen. Fear is a master illusionist. It borrows images from the past and projects them onto the future, then convinces you they are facts. In doing so, it keeps you trapped in a story that feels real but has no creative power. Faith, on the other hand, lives only in the present moment. It does not argue with fear, it simply outgrows it. Letting go of fear is not an act of willpower. You do not defeat fear by wrestling with it. You release fear by understanding that it is not who you are. Fear is a habit of thought, not a truth of being. The moment you stop identifying with it, it loses its authority. You begin to see fear the way you see a passing cloud, noticed, acknowledged, but not obeyed. When you let go of fear, doors do not open because you force them open. They open because they were never locked in the first place. Fear convinces you that life is withholding from you, that God is distant, that miracles are rare exceptions reserved for others. Faith reveals a different reality, that life is continuously offering, that God is intimately present, and that miracles are simply natural expressions of alignment. A miracle is not a violation of natural law. It is a violation of the limited way you have been taught to see natural law. The universe is not a closed system of scarcity and struggle. It is an ever-unfolding field of intelligence responding to consciousness. When your consciousness shifts from fear to trust, from control to surrender, from doubt to belief, the field responds accordingly, not as a reward, but as a reflection. Belief is not pretending everything is fine while ignoring pain. Belief is choosing to anchor your identity in something deeper than circumstances. Pain may visit, but it does not get to define you. Loss may occur, but it does not get to dictate your worth or your future. Faith says, even now, even here, even in this uncertainty, I am held, I am guided, I am not abandoned by life, I am being shaped by it. Surrender is often misunderstood as weakness, as giving up, as resignation. In truth, surrender is the highest form of strength. because it requires the courage to release the illusion of control. Surrender does not mean you stop taking action. It means your actions are no longer driven by panic. They are inspired rather than forced. They arise from listening rather than pushing. When you surrender, you stop asking, "How will this work?" and begin asking, "What is being asked of me right now?" That subtle shift changes everything. The mind wants the whole map. The soul needs only the next step. Faith is not about seeing the entire staircase. It is about trusting the step you are on. Aligning your thoughts with divine purpose does not require complex rituals or perfect behavior. It begins with noticing what you consistently tell yourself about who you are and what is possible. Every thought is either a bridge toward trust or a wall built by fear. When you choose thoughts that affirm connection rather than separation, you tune yourself to a higher frequency of experience. Divine purpose is not something imposed upon you from outside. It is an expression of what you already are. You were not created to struggle your way into worthiness. You were created from worthiness itself. The moment you accept that, your life begins to reorganize around that truth. Opportunities appear not because you chase them, but because you finally became receptive to them. Believing God for the impossible means believing that your life has meaning beyond what you can currently see. It means trusting that delays are not denials, that obstacles are not punishments, and that uncertainty is not evidence of failure. Often, the very conditions you are resisting are the conditions required to awaken a deeper level of faith within you. Consider how often you have prayed for clarity when what was actually being offered was trust. Consider how often you asked for strength when what was being invited was surrender. Life is not testing you to see if you are worthy of miracles. It is guiding you toward remembering that you are already an extension of the miraculous. The moment you stop begging life to prove itself to you and start trusting yourself to move with life, everything shifts. You become less concerned with outcomes and more attuned to alignment. You begin to notice guidance in subtle places, in intuition, in timing, in conversations that arrive unexpectedly, in doors that close not to punish you but to redirect you. Faith does not remove challenges, it transforms your relationship with them. What once felt like evidence of abandonment begins to feel like evidence of preparation. You realize that you were never meant to figure everything out before moving forward. You were meant to move forward so that understanding could meet you along the way. There is a divine rhythm moving through your life, whether you cooperate with it or not. When you resist it, it feels like struggle. When you align with it, it feels like flow. Belief is the bridge between those two experiences. Not belief as dogma, but belief as trust in the intelligence that breathes you, thinks through you, and loves through you. You do not activate faith by trying harder. You activate faith by softening, by loosening your grip on how things must look, by releasing the need to be right, to be in control, to be certain. Faith begins the moment you allow yourself to be supported. And perhaps the most radical realization of all is this: the God you are being asked to trust is not separate from you. It is not watching from a distance, deciding whether you deserve assistance. It is the very awareness reading these words, the quiet presence behind your thoughts, the life force animating your breath. To trust God is, ultimately, to trust the deepest part of yourself. When you believe from that place, impossibility loses its meaning. What remains is a quiet confidence, a steady openness, a willingness to walk forward even when the path is not fully lit. And in that willingness, miracles do not arrive with fanfare. They unfold naturally, gently, often in ways you could not have imagined, but recognize instantly as right. So step out in faith, not because you are certain of the outcome, but because you are certain of the source. Release fear, not by fighting it, but by outgrowing it. Align your thoughts, not with what has been, but with what is eternally possible. And trust deeply, calmly, unwaveringly, that when you believe God for the impossible, you are not asking life to bend to your will. You are finally allowing yourself to bend into the truth of who you have always been. And as you continue to walk in this quiet confidence, something subtle yet profound begins to happen within you. You notice that the urgency you once felt to prove yourself, to justify your worth, to defend your choices, starts to dissolve. You are no longer negotiating with life, you are cooperating with it. The need to be validated from the outside fades because you are finally anchored in an inner yes that does not require permission. This is the gentle power of faith, working not as spectacle, but as transformation. You begin to sense that the universe is not responding to your words so much as it is responding to your state of being. What you radiate inwardly becomes the invitation you extend outwardly. When fear dominated your inner landscape, life mirrored uncertainty. When trust becomes your resting place, life mirrors support. Not instantly, not theatrically, but faithfully, in its own wise timing. This is not coincidence, it is coherence. There is a sacred intelligence that arranges encounters, delays, and openings in ways the mind cannot orchestrate. When you are aligned, you no longer rush these movements or resist them. You learn to listen. You learn to wait without anxiety. You learn that stillness is not stagnation, but preparation. In that stillness, insight arises not as an answer shouted from the heavens, but as a quiet clarity that feels obvious once it arrives. The soul does not speak in panic. It speaks in calm assurance. It does not demand that you understand everything before you move. It asks only that you remain present and willing. Faith at this level becomes less about belief in an external outcome and more about fidelity to your inner guidance. You trust not because you are certain, but because you are aligned. As this alignment deepens, you may notice that what once felt impossible no longer intimidates you, not because the challenge has vanished, but because your identity has shifted. You no longer see yourself as a fragile being navigating a hostile world. You recognize yourself as an expression of the same creative force that forms galaxies and seasons and heartbeats. From that awareness, fear cannot sustain itself. You stop asking life to remove the obstacles and start asking what is being strengthened within you as you meet them. This is a powerful reorientation. The question is no longer, why is this happening to me? But what is this teaching me about who I truly am? In that question, victimhood dissolves and purpose emerges. Faith matures when you realize that nothing is ever truly working against you. Even resistance has intelligence within it. Even disappointment carries instruction. Even endings are gestures of grace, clearing space for a new expression of truth. When you trust this, you stop clinging to what was and open your hands to what is becoming. You begin to see that miracles are not interruptions of the ordinary, but revelations of the extraordinary that was always present. They occur when perception shifts, when the veil of fear lifts just enough for you to recognize the abundance that has been quietly surrounding you all along. Often, the miracle is not the sudden change of circumstances, but the sudden change of self. From this place, gratitude arises naturally, not as a forced practice, but as a state of awareness. You feel grateful not only for what pleases you, but for what refines you. Gratitude becomes your way of saying yes to life as it is, trusting that life knows how to lead you home to yourself. And in that yes, you discover a freedom that does not depend on conditions, a peace that does not require certainty, a joy that is not postponed until everything is resolved. This is the freedom of surrender, where you no longer resist the flow of existence, but move with it, guided by something wiser than fear. You realize then that faith was never about changing God's mind, it was about changing your own. It was about releasing the small, constricted story of who you thought you were and stepping into the vast, compassionate truth of who you have always been. In that truth, nothing is wasted, nothing is random, nothing is beyond redemption. So you keep walking, not hurried, not hesitant, but open. You trust the unfolding even when the path curves out of sight. You trust the silence as much as the answers. You trust yourself to listen, to respond, to align again and again. And in this ongoing trust, life meets you with a quiet affirmation that needs no explanation. This is what it means to believe God for the impossible, not as an event you wait for, but as a way of being you live from. It is the steady remembrance that you are guided, supported, and deeply loved by the same intelligence that dreamed you into existence. And as you rest in that remembrance, you no longer strain to make life work. Life begins effortlessly and faithfully to work through you. And as life begins to work through you rather than against you, you sense a gentler rhythm guiding your days. The frantic effort to anticipate every outcome softens, replaced by an attentiveness to what is actually here. You notice how each moment carries its own intelligence, how guidance often arrives disguised as simplicity. Faith, you realize, is not dramatic, it is steady, it is quiet. It is the willingness to be present without needing to control the story. In this presence, the past loosens its grip. Memories that once defined you begin to lose their emotional charge, not because they were denied, but because they were understood. You see now that the past was never a verdict, it was a classroom. Each experience shaped your capacity to trust, to forgive, to listen more deeply. Nothing you lived through was a mistake. It was preparation for this moment of awareness. And the future, which once loomed as a source of anxiety, starts to feel like an open field rather than a narrow corridor. You stop projecting fear forward and begin to extend faith instead. You understand that the future does not need to be managed, it needs to be welcomed. When you meet it with openness rather than apprehension, it responds in kind. There is a deep relief that comes from realizing you do not have to earn grace. You do not have to prove your worth to life. You were never placed here to be judged by your productivity or measured by your outcomes. You were placed here to remember, to express, to awaken. Faith reconnects you to that original intention. You begin to trust your inner nudges, those subtle impulses that guide you towards certain conversations, certain pauses, certain changes. You stop dismissing intuition as coincidence and start honoring it as communication. The more you listen, the clearer it becomes. Guidance multiplies when it is respected. At times, the path will still feel uncertain. Faith does not eliminate mystery, it sanctifies it. You learn to sit comfortably in not knowing, to let questions remain open without rushing to close them. In that openness, insight ripens naturally. Answers come not as conclusions, but as understandings that integrate quietly into your being. You notice that when fear arises, and it may still arise, you no longer identify with it. You observe it with compassion, understanding that it is simply an old habit of thought asking for reassurance. You do not push it away, nor do you let it steer. You acknowledge it, then return your attention to trust. This gentle redirection is an act of self-respect. As trust deepens, you find yourself extending it outward as well. You become less reactive to others' behavior, less inclined to judge or defend. You see that everyone is navigating their own fears, their own awakenings. Compassion becomes easier when you recognize that the same intelligence guiding you is guiding all beings, even when it appears hidden. This compassion does not weaken you, it strengthens you. It frees you from the burden of resentment, from the exhausting need to be right. Forgiveness emerges not as a moral obligation, but as a natural consequence of understanding. You forgive because you no longer want to carry what weighs you down. In this lighter state, creativity flows more freely. Ideas arrive without force. Solutions present themselves without strain. You discover that inspiration thrives in an atmosphere of trust. When you stop gripping life tightly, it offers you more than you could have planned. Faith, at this stage, becomes embodied. It is no longer something you think about, it is something you live from. It shapes how you speak, how you listen, how you choose. It informs your relationships, your work, your sense of purpose. You are not trying to be faithful. You are being faithful to your deepest knowing. And perhaps most importantly, you realize that believing God for the impossible was never about reaching some distant peak. It was about returning again and again to alignment. It was about remembering that you are not separate from the source of life, that you are a participant in its unfolding, a vessel through which it expresses. So you continue, not with certainty, but with confidence, not with guarantees, but with grace. You trust the unseen currents carrying you forward. You trust the pauses as much as the progress. You trust that what is meant for you cannot miss you, and what misses you was never meant to define you. In this trust, you find rest. In this rest, you find clarity. And in this clarity, you recognize the quiet miracle that has been unfolding all along, the awakening of a self that no longer lives in fear of life, but in partnership with it. And in that partnership with life, you begin to feel a deeper sense of reverence for the ordinary moments that once slipped past unnoticed, the way light enters a room, the cadence of your own breath, the simple fact that you are here, aware, alive, and capable of choosing trust again. These moments no longer feel small. They feel sacred, as if life is quietly reminding you that meaning was never hidden in grand outcomes, but woven into presence itself. You start to sense that faith is not something you turn on only when things are difficult. It becomes the atmosphere you live in, the lens through which you experience both ease and challenge. When something unfolds smoothly, you receive it with gratitude rather than entitlement. When something resists, you meet it with curiosity rather than despair. This balanced openness keeps your heart available, unguarded, and responsive. There is a subtle courage that emerges from this way of living. Not the loud courage of defiance, but the steady courage of authenticity. You become less interested in performing a role and more devoted to expressing truth. You allow yourself to be seen as you are without embellishment or apology. Faith gives you permission to be real because you no longer believe that love must be earned through perfection. As you live from this authenticity, relationships begin to change. Some deepen, nourished by honesty and presence. Others fall away, not in conflict, but in quiet completion. You understand that not every connection is meant to last forever, and not every ending is a failure. Trust allows you to honor what was without clinging to what is no longer aligned. You also notice how often life has been guiding you through subtle invitations rather than forceful demands, a feeling that it is time to rest, a sense that it is time to speak, a quiet knowing that something must be released to make room for what is next. Faith sharpens your sensitivity to these invitations, and following them becomes an act of self-respect rather than risk. At times, you may still feel the mind searching for reassurance, wanting signs, wanting proof that you are on the right path, but now you meet that searching with kindness. You remind yourself that faith does not require constant confirmation. It requires presence, patience, and willingness. You learn to trust the direction even when the destination remains undefined. There is a deep humility that accompanies this trust. You recognize that life's wisdom far exceeds your own plans, and instead of resisting that truth, you find comfort in it. You are relieved of the burden of having to know everything. You are free to participate without needing to dominate the process. And in this humility, joy finds you more easily. Not the fleeting joy that depends on circumstances, but the steady joy that arises from alignment. It is the joy of feeling connected, of sensing that your life belongs within a larger harmony. Even in moments of sadness, this joy remains as an undercurrent, reminding you that nothing you experience is isolated or meaningless. Faith also begins to shape how you respond to the world's uncertainty. Instead of absorbing collective fear, you become a quiet presence of steadiness. You listen without panic, you act without aggression, you contribute clarity rather than confusion. This is not because you deny what is happening, but because you trust that fear is not the most intelligent response available. You realize that belief is contagious, just as fear is. When you live from trust, you give others permission to soften their grip as well. Your calm becomes an offering. Your presence becomes reassurance. Without preaching or persuading, you embody a reminder that life can be met with openness rather than resistance. As this way of being settles more deeply into you, you stop measuring progress by external markers. You no longer ask whether you are ahead or behind. You ask only whether you are aligned. This single question simplifies everything. When the answer is yes, you proceed. When the answer is no, you pause and listen. And listening becomes one of your greatest strengths. You listen not only to others, but to yourself. To the body when it asks for care. To the heart when it asks for honesty. To the soul when it asks for trust. Faith grows strongest when it is practiced in these small, consistent acts of attention. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, you realize that the impossible no longer feels distant, not because every problem has vanished, but because your relationship to possibility has changed. You no longer define what can happen based on past limitations. You leave room for surprise. You allow life to exceed your expectations. In that allowance, something extraordinary becomes ordinary, a sense of companionship with the unseen. You feel accompanied rather than alone, guided rather than abandoned. Even in silence, there is a sense of support. Even in uncertainty, there is a sense of direction. And so the journey continues, not as a struggle towards some future resolution, but as a living practice of trust. Each day becomes an opportunity to choose alignment over fear, presence over projection, surrender over control. You do not get it perfect, and you no longer need to. Faith was never about perfection. It was always about return. Return to the truth that you are held. Return to the knowing that life is not hostile to you. Return to the quiet confidence that whatever unfolds next, you will meet it with an open heart and a steady trust. And in that return, again and again, the impossible quietly becomes possible, not as a miracle you chase, but as a reality you allow.